Welcome to the Spirit of Mayflower podcast with me, Rachel Carter.
I'd like to welcome to the podcast my special guest, Henderson Mullin, and he's the Chief Exec of Writing East Midlands. And they've been tasked with putting together this celebratory piece for the Mayflower called Radical Roots. So welcome to the podcast, Henderson.
Hello, Rachel. Thank you for asking me to come on.
No problem, my pleasure. So let's just dive straight in and find out a bit about you. So could you tell us what your job role is with Writing East Midlands?
Yeah, I guess Writing East Midlands first, as it sounds, is an organisation. It's an arts organisation, and what we do is promote and support writing and writers across the East Midlands. We've been going for about 12 years now, and we work with all sorts of generations, from very young people, 7 or 8 years old, right up to much older people, older than 85 or 90, providing a whole range of projects or services or access to people who just feel that they want to express themselves, and get involved in their creative imaginations. So we facilitate that as much as we can. What I actually do is get in the way of people that do the real work. It's what I do.
Oh, well, somebody's got to steer the ship, haven't they?
Yeah, I guess so. I try to avoid rocks and stuff like that. I like that sort of naval analogy. Yes, I steer the ship, Rachel. That's what I do. Yes.
Oh, and so the output of people's writing, whether that be sort of, would some of that be fiction or history writing or poetry? Would that be a combination of, lots of types of genres?
Absolutely, Rachel. All sorts. We do everything from I guess some people, if you say writing, they think of very traditional prose, and almost Jane Eyre kind of stuff, and they think of the classics. And we do facilitate that sort of writing, but also we'll go right across the board to much more contemporary genres like spoken word, hip hop, and rap, which is very popular amongst a lot of people also. So, and we do memoir if people are interested in that as well. We do all sorts of genres. That, we've got a very wide definition of what writing is, and for us, writing is about expression that can be repeated. If that makes sense. So if you're just saying things like I am at the moment, it's not really writing, because I don't know what I've just said. But if I can repeat it, whether that's orally or I can or written down, then that is a form of writing. So it's that ability to repeat it and to pass it on, which is which defines writing. So that can be very, very many genres.
Right. And so the East Midlands obviously has got quite a big Mayflower story. So were you approached by the Pilgrim Roots organisation, or was it a different organisation that approached you about the new piece, the Radical Roots magazine?
Yeah, I mean, it all came back about last year when a collective, if you like, of people working across the Mayflower region, Pilgrim region, came together. The idea was to find a way to talk about the connections that the Mayflower has to the region, and to talk about some of the project work that's going on, some of the arts work that's going on, and to draw it all together, not as an advertisement for the work, but to talk about the ideas underneath the projects, and to make something new and interesting, and also to connect the Mayflower story, as was, to the way that people are living now in the region, as is. So to make that sort of leap across 400 years, and to show the relevance that the story has on people in and around Lincolnshire, North Nottinghamshire, South Yorkshire even, and to make that sort of connection with the people's lives here.
Adding in the reflections of people today I think it's quite important to give people a different type of voice, isn't it? And I suppose that's what the aim of Radical Roots is, to reflect on our shared history, to think about what that means to us today, and give new voices to it.
Yes, I think it really is an important thing in art to always connect people to the contemporary, if you like, to give it a context. So it'd be great to talk about the Mayflower just as a completely historical thing, for example, but it's much more interesting to look at it and use it as a mirror, if you like, to people's lives today. And then people living now can go, oh yeah, I can see why that's relevant, or I should be interested in that, or I ought to know about that, because they can see what it has to do with their own lives.
That's a really nice analogy there, that holding up a mirror, so that we can reflect on the history and then what that means to us today. And I suppose that leads us into the poetry competition that Writing East Midlands ran with some young people. And we're going to be hearing from those young people in a moment. So can you tell us a little bit about this poetry call out that you did?
Yeah, sure. Been doing it for a few years now. We've got an adult one called Aurora, and a younger person's one called Solstice, and people listening will grab onto these sort of astrological associations with those two terms. They fall at the particular points of the year. The idea behind Solstice really is to encourage young people to write and to express themselves in whatever way they'd like to do, or whatever themes they'd like to cover. So it's poetry in the main that comes back in, but not necessarily so. So what we then did was look at some of the shortlisted work, and we found that there were themes that emerged. We hadn't pushed on the young people, but quite often they came back writing about particular things. So what we have here is a selection of them which speak particularly to the Mayflower story.
So let's dive straight in with the first of our poems from the young people. And I'm going to introduce Kayla, who's age 17, with her poem titled Freedom.
Freedom. Freedom, you say? That's white men's beast black men could never tame. Freedom. Freedom, you say? Like hawks feasting on a mockingbird's nape. Free like bullets propelling through time and space, marking black silhouettes against a whitened frame, with hands armed with nothing but the tumorous fate. I don't have no guns, sir, just this bloody, I mean brown, I mean black, unripe and bitter taste of freedom. Free like the madman with scripture as his law, or the drunken plight of a patriot closing his doors. Freedom. Free like the sweet taste of indigenous land to a colonial tongue. Freedom. Free like the wild-eyed woman with woven fruits on her sleeve and embroidered lust, I mean legs, I mean lemons down the seams that their eyes cannot help but touch, that their hands cannot help but reach. What is a permission to a beast that does act when it's free? Freedom?
What a beautifully written and read piece of poetry. It was so emotive, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's beautifully presented, and particularly so young and so emotive. She's basically pointing out that the idea of freedom is easy for some people to use and much more difficult to others, depending on your circumstances. But it features some lovely imagery as well as the emotion. You know, that idea, hawks feasting on a mockingbird's frame, which is a beautiful line, isn't it? And the point she makes about indigenous lands on colonial tongues, which speaks very closely to the Mayflower story, which has a checkered past, really. I mean, it's a great story in many ways, but we should never forget the cost that the colonial cost to the indigenous people of America, and what effect that this story has had on them and their lives, and the loss of land and loss of culture. And Kayla's poem speaks to that, I think, very, very eloquently and very, very emotionally.
Yeah, it's incredible to think, that she's only 17 years old, and she writes in such a beautiful style. Yeah, it's hats off to her.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? That's one thing that strikes us is that if you give young people an opportunity, you're often amazed with with how eloquent. Particularly that today, when people are supposed to be less eloquent because I don't know, they're on their young people are less eloquent because they're on their phones and all that sort of thing. It just really isn't true.
Exactly, and I think this would be a good chance now to introduce our youngest poet, and we're going to hear from Teresa, who's only 10 years old, and her poem is called Journey to Georgia in the Night.
We were heading to Georgia, late in the night. We all looked out of the window and gasped at the sight. Glowing stars shimmered magically in the misty blue sky, while we made wishes as shooting ones passed by. There were sheep grazing on the meadow, and dark trees way up high. There were lazy cows yawning, who then lay down with a big heaving sigh. A warm breeze whistled through the long tangled grass. The train side glimmered as dew collected on the steel and brass. Can you hear the cicadas hum and branches rustling in the moonlight bright, and the little dwarf owls which twit through the night? A waft flows through the window, fresh mountain thyme. I'm aware of no one, it's just me against time. We've arrived at the farm, I feel my thumping heart leap. Now I'm not nervous, because these days will be a treat. We were heading to Georgia late in the night. No one was stirring as we were all asleep in the flickering light.
Well, she really paints such a vivid picture. You can see the scenery in your mind, can't you?
Yeah, it's funny, Rachel, because Teresa sent in an actual picture, a pictorial map of the journey. So it's funny you could see it, or we can see it in our minds. She actually has drawn it for us. It's a beautiful picture. It's lovely, isn't it? It's about hope. It's about new life. There's a bit of loss in there about leaving an old life, and she describes this journey through, and it's also not just a journey across roads and things. It's also a journey through nature, because there's some lovely lines in there about owls and grass and hooting and things. So she really is evoking the landscape that she's moving through to, and it's a kind of also a metaphor for her hopes of a brighter life for her and her family. It's a beautiful poem, that is.
It is. And so let's look at some of the other entries that you're supplied with as part of Radical Roots. So would you say the adults are doing their bit with the writing, and are they matching the incredible talents of these young people?
I don't. There's no competition there. It's just a different sort of expression. And yes, there are very many adult voices. We're very careful to represent the range of ages in the magazine, which is why I was so keen to get young voices in there, but also different genders, and also different voices from communities. So we really wanted to represent the area, Lincolnshire, and not North Nottinghamshire, as a multi-cultured, multi-generational area that it is.
Yeah, and the last edition, I read every single word. I just couldn't stop reading, and there's such a breadth of different things, and I particularly loved on the final pages some of the shared recipes that had come from different community backgrounds, and and to go and try those out yourself at home, then that gives you just another, I'm going to say flavour, because it does, another element of this story.
Yeah, because these things they don't have to be great big thinky pieces all the time. Actually the food stories was one of the most popular items, so we've repeated that in the magazine which will be out next week. And we've asked Sonia Hundal, who wrote those pieces, to go back to Boston Market this time. And what she does is she just spends time on a market stall talking to anybody about food and what they're buying and why they're buying it, what they're going to do with it. And she's just recorded the conversation. It's just lovely, really, because food is, I mean, it's a bit of a cliche, but it really is. Food is the universal. Everybody loves it. It brings people together, no matter where you're from. So that's why we're really keen to have those sorts of stories in them. And also food travels with people. There's, the Mayflower people took apples from Nottinghamshire with them, as you'll know on your journeys, Rachel, to America, following the Pilgrim routes. So it's food's a beautiful thing, isn't it? It does carry stories with it.
It does, and the food on the ship most of the time was good, but there did tend to be a lot of cabbage.
Well, most food's good. I think you can have enough cabbage, can't you?
Yeah.
Did they jazz it up a bit? Did they put a bit of stock in there or something to make it taste less cabbage-like?
Well, after I think about 5 days of cabbage, I did sort of mix and match with as many condiments as I could find to kind of add some different flavors.
I'm sure you were healthy when you got off the boat, though.
Yeah. So with that thought in our mind, we're going to move on to
having lowered the tone to cabbage. Go on.
yeah. So let's introduce another of our young poets, and this one is a poem by Chloe, who's age 15, and her poem is called Queen.
They ain't trippin' when they say they finna pull up. They ain't lying when they say there's a gun in the truck. But I ain't trippin' when I say I love too much. And I ain't lying when I say I fell out of touch. 'Cause the world, it ain't fair when you're a girl like me. And my daddy shot down by shooters of the police. And every day it's fear that I step out of line. 'Cause they said what to be, and now I ain't really mine. And slim I lost him, trying to save myself. We ran and tried to hide on the road like nothing else. They had a gun and they shot like we don't mean shit. 'Cause a black life don't matter when a white one's been hit.
Again, such a powerful piece, and you can hear such raw emotion in her voice as she reads it.
You really can. When I first heard that, I mean, I was really moved, because, as you say, it's riding on it's in her voice. She really cares about this subject, and we've all been deeply affected, I think, one way or the other, because of the Black Lives movement this year, and the stark realization that there is such injustice around, not just in America, but here also. And this is somebody who writes about the loss of a father. The character loses a father. I'm not suggesting it's Chloe herself, but it really is a raw and yeah, emotional thing. It's amazing. She's so young as well.
It is, and I think particularly as we enter a second wave of COVID, and many people have lost loved ones through that as well. I think a lot of people can relate to this poem on so many different levels.
Absolutely, loss, isn't it? And here we are, just about to go in, as you say. A kind of loss is when you're separated from your loved ones for any length of time, also. But so, as you say, Rach, we'll all be feeling that separation and loss quite keenly, I think, as we go forward.
Yes, And that also reflects on the Mayflower story with a lot of people that chose to follow their fate and go on this incredible journey on the Mayflower. A lot of them left loved ones behind. So again, that phrase that you used at the beginning of the podcast of as holding up a mirror to the past to look at ourselves today, we are living in a time of separation, and that's something that is reflected in that Mayflower story.
Absolutely. There are. A thought just suddenly struck me actually, that all of the poems that we are using are by females, by women or young women, and in the actual magazine, many of the voices that are in it are also by women. That's partly deliberately because I was interested and I'm interested in women's voices, and that is because in the Mayflower story, you will have the records of the men, people like a Brewer, and we have his documents. What we don't have are the women's tales, and it's the women that usually keep communities together. And in the background, so I think that's a real reflection, I guess, between the stories of the Mayflower now and the stories that are coming through today when people move from one place to another. It's the women who we don't hear from, who are less visible, and I'm particularly interested in their mirrors, if you like, to go back to that idea, and how their lives are reflected, and what has changed or not changed for them over the years. It's an interesting thing.
Oh, I'm really looking forward to reading the next edition of Radical Roots and delving through all the pages. And I think that our next young poet has a very different take on her poem. So we're going to hear from Hannah. She's just 11 years old, and the title of her poem is called Journey to Joy.
Have you ever felt so scared that you want to lock all your doors and throw away the key? Turn off your light to make sure you don't see the darkness at the end of the tunnel, the crashing waves at sea. But what you don't know is that what you're actually afraid of, your lifelong fear, is starting that new path, that new atmosphere. But the question is, why do you always guess darkness and overlook success when you haven't even opened the door but you still second guess? Like the sun and moon and day and night, the road to accomplishment mustn't have some bumps or it's just not right. So please, dear listener, when the door is unlocked and the time is just right, walk the path with your head held high and don't even think of closing your eyes, for the road to success will not be an easy ride.
Well, such an amazing piece of advice from such a young person, and something we can all take from this poem.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's beautiful, isn't it? When she says walk the path with your head held high, the road to success is no easy ride. So it is about aspirations, and she's speaking to us as a young person, but she's speaking to us old people as well. And it's just about hopes and dreams, isn't it? And it's about it's a very positive thoughts, and it's a new take on what journeys are. And her journey is really a journey through life, and trying to make a life which is good, but not cutting off her ambitions or letting us cut off our ambitions before we've even looked at them. So it's brilliant for a young person to think so positively,
I think we'll go straight into our next poem, and this one is from Kyra, and she's age 16. Her poem is called Lives Matter.
Innocent people being mistreated and murdered. The unheard voices of painful murmurs. I wonder what it'd be like without judgment of skin, when society decides to allow everyone in. What we need to remember is that Black Lives Matter. Otherwise, eventually, the world will shatter. Their lives matter more than your feelings. So let's come together and drop unnecessary beatings. You post on social media emphasising your disgust. But is your passion on this something we trust? Protests are happening all around the world, making sure the voices are certainly heard. We are all human, no matter what our ethnicity. We need to get this message out, show its publicity. Stop all these rumours of evil lives. All lives matter. Open your eyes.
Well, that's such a it's a simple poem, but it's so honest and truthful, isn't it? You can really feel that in that piece.
Yeah, and what impressed me about it, Rachel, was it's quite easy with the Black Lives Matter to counter that with a really difficult but all lives matter narrative, which misses the point, because the Black Lives Matter movement is not saying that only Black Lives Matter. It's saying, look, we need to look at this particular problem.
Yeah.
Of injustice. It's not against anything. It's all it's saying is, let's look at this particular problem and circumstances. So Kyra manages to do that in her poem Lives Matter, when she says things like, let's look at people without judgments of skin. And when society decides to let everyone in, which is a lovely rhyme and a very powerful one. And then she makes some interesting and I thought very mature observations about social media and its role, and whether the voices on social media can be trusted, and the effect they can have on situations, and lashing out without thinking. So I think it's a really wonderful poem that Kyra's written there, and they're presented so calmly and evenly as well. It's a lovely piece from her. I think we could all listen well to it, to be honest.
Definitely. I think what this selection of young women poets has shown us, that that they've taken on these quite difficult topics, and they've found very different voices to explain them and to bring powerful emotions out into their poetry. And it's just wonderful. I think you've selected such an amazing group of young women there.
Yeah, I well, thank you. I think if they selected themselves, it's that they are just fantastic, really. The thoughts that have gone into there. It was very easy for me, once I'd read them, to try and, going back to the mirror thing, look at what the relevance was to the Mayflower story. And what you've got there is the idea of freedom from Kyla, and that's obviously why the separatists left, for freedom to worship. You've got a journey from Teresa, and that's what the Pilgrims undertook. You've got loss in Chloe's journey, and a lot of people died, not just the Pilgrims, but the indigenous peoples as well, in the establishment of the colony and thereafter. You've got aspirations and hopes for new life in Journey to Joy from Hannah. And then you've got an idea of social justice for all in Kyra's poem. That's what the Mayflower Compact was supposed to be doing, which some people then led on to the Constitution. It's quite opposite, I guess, as we're sitting here talking about it, that the election's going off in the States at the moment, and that whole idea of the Constitution, what it stands for, fairness of process, all of that is being undermined as we speak.
Yeah.
and it's turned into quite a what's the word, a well-timed bunch of poems, actually, that these young people have put together.
Yeah. So these will be obviously featured in the Radical Roots magazine. And what other things have we got to look forward to in the next edition?
Oh, now you're asking. We started off actually with the idea of journeys for the first one, as it's not a massive theme, but just underlying it. This one also has journeys in it, underline it, but also the idea of what communities are, because obviously once you've made your journey, like the Pilgrims did, all like people who have arrived on these shores have, whether it's going back through time and the Anglo-Saxons which are here. I remember in your piece in the first magazine, Rachel, you talked about how your family have been here for so long.
Yeah.
And in your second piece, which is in the new one, if people are listening, which is about your family journey to Whitby and what it meant with your father. But it all talks about what the place of communities are and people's places and feelings within it. So that's the underlying idea of our place in communities in this magazine. So we've got an article about the women's role in communities, which we talked about before. We've got an article set in Boston about a flaneur. Who's basically a guy who talks a lot and goes around Boston looking at artifacts through art and frotting. People can look what that means. It doesn't mean what you think it means. It is an artistic process. And we've also got, I've mentioned your article about your family journey to Whitby. We've got lots of music in this one. David Fawcett is a composer who was making a cantata, a series of short musical pieces to celebrate the Mayflower journey. So we've got excerpts from that where David talks about which each piece means and his thinking behind it, which is a deeply interesting piece. We've also got Hitain Patel, who is working on the Future of Many project, and he's talking around his experience of being an immigrant in this country, how his identity has changed and keeps changing. It's not a static thing, it's quite a fluid thing, and how that experience might reflect on other people who are here from somewhere else, and how we have this idea of being from somewhere else but also British at the same time, and how these ideas interact with each other within him and how it's expressed in his art. It's a really interesting piece, that. And we have got the food journeys I talked about before, which is a really nice visit to the market as well, much lighter piece. And we've also got a picture story, virtual reality story, which retells the Mayflower journey, but using wraparound art as well. So a real interesting mixture of stuff. Lots of stuff to click on, lots of stuff to listen to, and lots of things to view, because the beauty of an online magazine, you can do things at different layers of media, can't you? So it's quite an interesting to work through. There's a load of content in it.
Yeah, well, I'm really looking forward to reading it, and so I'll make sure I put a link on my website. But if people are interested in either Writing East Midlands or the Radical Roots publication, is there any online resources that they can go to?
Yeah, the magazine will be full of links to take you off elsewhere, so it's not, as I say, it's not just a static read. If you are interested in the story, then this is a great place to start, I think, and then go off to other places to find out more. So the Radical Roots magazine will allow you to do that, and as well as hopefully challenging our own thinking around what the Mayflower journey was and what it is now to people, and how they live together in our various communities. There's a soapbox for you, Rachel.
Excellent. Well,
I'm on my soapbox there, better get off it now.
well, thank you so much, Henderson, for being a guest. It's been a delight talking with you as ever. I really enjoy our conversations.
Oh, it's always lovely talking to you, Rachel. We'll have to have a coffee or beer or something soon when we're allowed to, but stay well till then, and thanks for inviting me on.
No problem. Take care, Henderson.
You watch yourself out there. Take care, love.
Well, do tune in for the next episode of the Spirit of Mayflower podcast, where I'll have two special guests, Ella and Wim Pritchard of Highcliffe Music, who have been providing me with lots of songs and letters written from the perspective of Mary Brewster. Spirit of Mayflower is part of a series celebrating my Spirit of Mayflower project. You can get involved in lots of ways. You can take a look at some of the movies and pictures I took on my journey by heading to the Rachel Carter Sculpture Facebook page. You can also head to my website at www.rachelcarter.co.uk, and there you'll be able to view some of the sculptures I make, treat yourself to a limited edition Pilgrim Woman sculpture, or take a look at some of the online tutorials